Transfer on death designations, or TODs, are one of the simplest ways to pass money to loved ones, and I'm going to explain why this could be one of the biggest mistakes you make in your estate plan. You think it's easy. You just set up a TOD or a transfer on death designation, and it passes very simply to the person that you want to go to. It avoids probate. It's inexpensive. There's a lot of good things about it. But unfortunately, I meet with a lot of families who add these to all of their different accounts, which can create a huge problem later on. It can cause confusion, it can cause legal battles, it can cause more time with attorneys, and even disrupt entire family relationships. As a financial planner, I have to meet with people who are beneficiaries of TOD accounts, and unfortunately, the process didn't go as their parents or grandparents really intended. They thought it would be a really simple process, but maybe they ended up getting more, or maybe they ended up getting less from their parents than what they intended. In the end, it didn't work out how they intended, and let's go through some examples of why and how you can better set it up so you don't make these same mistakes. On the surface, TODs sound perfect. They avoid probate, they're really inexpensive to set up, and they'll pass relatively quickly usually to a beneficiary. You're thinking, hey, what's wrong with that? That sounds great. We can avoid probate. I don't need to set up an expensive trust. It's really, really simple. The problem with that is it doesn't take into account contingencies. So if you want to leave a certain amount of money to charities or nieces and nephews or smaller gifts to someone else with what's left in your estate and then pass money to everybody else, there's really no way to account for that. The other thing that it ignores is expenses. There are final expenses when you pass away. And I know that sounds obvious, but I meet so many people who have all of their money passed via these TODs, and then there's no money left in the estate to pay final funeral expenses or property taxes on the home that they've left, or maybe that there's just final expenses that they have to account for with the executor. So there's lots of expenses when people pass away that if there's no money left in the estate, it can cause a big issue where you have to actually go to the beneficiaries and say, hey, can I have some of that money back that you got? Because we actually need to pay for some things. That's a problem. The other thing to keep in mind is they override your will or trust. So sometimes people go through these really carefully, well thought out plans, spend good money on an attorney to draft a will or a trust, but then ignore everything in it. That's a huge problem. The other main issue I see with this is they can create unequal inheritances. Sometimes people just add a son or daughter or grandchild to an account, and maybe that bank account was very small at a certain point in time, but then money gets deposited later on where it becomes a much bigger part of their estate. And if you named a beneficiary on that, now everything is blown out of proportion relative to the careful planning you did in your will or your trust. Do you have an example of someone in your life or something that you experienced where they put a TOD on an account and it led to a bad outcome? I'd love to hear it. Drop it in the comments down below and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's go into a few examples to make this a little more concrete of what can happen when you make this mistake. So let's take the example of Gary. Gary had a bunch of different accounts, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, and loved his daughters equally. But unfortunately, Gary thought, hey, I'm just going to start naming sort of nilly-willy whoever I want on these accounts. So one daughter was named the beneficiary of one account, next daughter was named a beneficiary of the other. He wasn't splitting it 50-50, and it kind of just depended on his mood of the day. And unfortunately, when he went to go and pass away, one daughter ended up with significantly more money than the other. Not because he intended for either to receive vastly different sums. It's just that when he wasn't quite in his right state of mind or he wasn't sure what he was doing, he made them beneficiaries at different times. It wasn't that he loved them unequally. It was just that he wanted to add them at that certain time to a beneficiary on the account. And this caused some issues where they had to true this up and use some of their lifetime gift tax exemption amount to true this up among themselves after he passed. And it wasn't as simple as, hey, you take 50%, I take 50%. Now there had to be some accounting and some tax consequences too when they went and did it behind the scenes. Another person I know didn't leave anything in the estate other than a home. So unfortunately, all these accounts passed out to their heirs, but now there wasn't any money to pay the property taxes that were coming up. They needed to prep the house for sale. And although it wasn't a ton of money, there wasn't actually any money liquid now. So the beneficiaries had to pay in, and the executor had to go to them awkwardly to say, hey, all that money that I gave you, I actually need some of that back to prepare the house. And you'll get some of this back when the house sells, but I need that money now. This can be a huge issue. People don't think about their funeral expenses, and funeral maybe can easily top $20,000 that they need to cover. Property taxes on homes might be $5,000 for the upcoming bill or more. There oftentimes in a cohesive estate plan, there has to be some money left in the estate. It depends on the attorney you're working with and how you want to structure this. But putting everything as a transfer on death can lead to issues at the end of life if there's still some expenses to be paid. Another example is someone decides to name a small bank account. They think, hey, I want some money available at the end of life for this person to be able to cover some of those small expenses really easily and quickly, as opposed to it going through the probate process and going to an estate account and then paying out of the estate account. So they name them on the small bank account to make money available. Unfortunately, they go to sell their home, they're going to go rent a place, and they have money deposited into this small bank account with every intention to move it to their brokerage account. They think, hey, it's only going to be there for a little bit of time, but it ends up sitting there a little bit longer than anticipated, and they pass away. Now, this home was worth a sizable amount of money, so now there's $1 million in this bank account going to one child that was actually intended for two. So one person ended up getting far more money than they ever anticipated. And now it's really up to that child to decide if they want to share that money with their sibling or not. As you can see, it could cause some major issues at the end of life if it's not done properly. I've also run into people who, again, create a really well thought out estate plan, pay good money to an attorney to create a will or trust, and they have some charitable intentions and also want to make some smaller gifts to nieces and nephews. So they say, hey, I'm going to give $20,000 to my niece, $20,000 to my nephew, and $50,000 to this charitable organization, and the rest to my kids. So they want to make these gifts, but still have their kids get the majority of it. Unfortunately, they add TODs on every single account. And again, this is going to override your will or trust. So everything is passed and nothing ends up going to those charitable beneficiaries or the nieces or nephews. So now it's on the kids to decide, hey, this was in the will. I know this was my parents' intentions. Do I actually want to share this money and now gift it to them in a responsible way? So as you can imagine, the charitable organization was counting on this gift. The nieces and nephews were also counting on it. And it didn't end up happening because they had transfer on death designations on every account. So why does this happen? Why do people make this mistake? And why do they continue to make this mistake? One, it's really easy to do. Oftentimes, if you're a brokerage or a bank account, it's as simple as a form. Sometimes you can do it online and instantly make them, whoever it is, 100% beneficiary or 50-50 or 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It doesn't matter. It's really simple and easy to do. And people think that they're saving money on attorney's fees, which they are. But the problem with that is they may override all the money that they already spent on the attorney fees, or there might be good reasons to actually spend money on an attorney. And maybe the estate plan isn't as simple as adding a TOD. It can be okay in certain situations, but when you just do it on every account without any thought, without consulting someone and thinking about your plan, it can become a real issue. It also makes it seem like they're making it easy on their family. If you go read online, everybody says avoid probate, and the default recommendation that people have out there is put a TOD on the account, and people, without understanding exactly what that does or what it means in their own plan, just add that thinking, oh, this is easy, it avoids probate, that's a good thing, let's move on. Estate planning is not a quick and simple thing. It's out of all the areas to spend some money, it's often one of the best and highest and best uses of that fund to consult someone to see how can I get this money to people as tax efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible, and still fulfill my wishes. That is an important thing that, in a common theme throughout these conversations here, is when people add TODs on this without really thinking about it, oftentimes it's actually going against their own wishes and what their intentions were. So what's the solution to all this? As I mentioned, hiring an attorney is a good first step. Simple is often good, but sometimes people have more complex estate plans where you actually want to have money go into the estate. We gave the example of the person trying to name multiple beneficiaries and then a remainder gift to whoever's left. That can be a good situation where TODs can't account for that within the paperwork typically. There's also the case of estate liquidity. If there's no money left in the estate, and let's say it's just a house or an illiquid business or something else, how is that going to actually keep running? There's no funds to actually pay for that. We've paid out the money to the beneficiaries. Now the executor has to go, hey, I don't have the funds to pay this. Can I have some of that money back? And that can evolve into a legal battle very quickly. Or maybe they decide, hey, I'm going to pay some money out of pocket and hopefully reimburse myself later. Or maybe they don't have the funds to do that, and that becomes an issue of themselves. So think about your estate liquidity at the end of life. This is a common thing that I see people skip and just go, hey, TODs to everybody, doesn't matter, but what about the funeral expenses? What about estate taxes, property taxes, paying for properties? Anything that happens to keep your life going once you pass away, there's usually some expenses to that. Another idea is to use a trust for more complex situations, and this depends on the estate and whether you have property in multiple states. Oftentimes that can be a good reason to do it. If a state filings are really expensive in your state, sometimes that can be a good reason to do that. I ran across someone the other day that's inheriting some money from California. Unfortunately, no money was in a trust, and so their estate filing fees, or the fees going to the attorneys to settle this estate, are very expensive. That's why oftentimes in certain states where estate consequences can be very expensive, you see a trust, whereas probate in some states is a relatively fast process. I'm talking months to a year. That is fast in some states, and it's not expensive. So maybe that's an okay process to go through where you still have some access to the funds throughout that time. And then lastly, review and update your plan regularly. This is a big one. When I see people, they maybe made an estate plan 15, 20 years ago, maybe they had young kids at the time and kids are now adults with their own families and they haven't revisited the estate plan, and there's some major changes they want to make. That's good reason to review that. And at the same time, don't just review the documents. Review beneficiaries, review account titling, review life insurance policies, review everything to figure out where is it going to go if I pass away, and is it to the right person, and is it with the intentions that I originally had, and are those intentions still valid? Remember, estate planning is not about being cheap or fast. Again, it's an area where I would spend money because this is the end of life. There aren't any do-overs with this typically, and if there are, it's usually a very expensive and laborious process that you don't want to put on your beneficiaries. So it's your one opportunity to get it right and make sure that everything you want to have happen actually does happen. So here's the bottom line. TODs can have a place within a well thought out estate plan, but just slapping a TOD on every single account often is not the solution. It's one of the biggest mistakes you can make and cause headaches and cost your heirs more money and can backfire significantly. If you found this video helpful, click the like button and send it to a friend. I want to spread the word about estate planning mistakes that happen and how that can backfire in your life. That way, fewer mistakes are made going forward. Thanks for watching.